everybody, and welcome back to our study on Ecclesiastes. Today we'll be covering Ecclesiastes chapter 7, and this is one of my favorite portions of Ecclesiastes, which honestly I love the entire book. So saying that's a little bit repetitive, but it's one of my favorites. But before we dive into Ecclesiastes 7, I want us to first bow our heads in prayer, so if you wouldn't mind closing your eyes and bowing your heads with me. Lord, thank you for today. Thank you for what each of us have been able to accomplish today, and please give each of us the grace to let ourselves be all right with what we were not able to get done today. Please help us to be able to gain something from this study. Please help whatever you want to be said to be what makes it through to the final cut of this, and please help anything that is just me to simply get cut out of this video. God, please help each of the viewers to just have an amazing rest of their day and to really benefit from watching this, to be able to take something from this chapter of Ecclesiastes and be able to apply it to their lives, Lord. Please help everybody watching this to remain happy and healthy and whole, and if they are not those things, to develop those traits and those attributes accordingly. Lord, in your blessed name, amen. So before diving into our Bible reading today, I just want to spotlight our tea of the day today, because one of my pen pals sent it to me and it's pretty darn good. So it is the Yogi brand green tea kombucha. I didn't know you could steep kombucha. I've always just bought, the pre-bottled stuff. It's honestly pretty good. Would highly recommend. I'm kind of sad I only had one bag of it, so I'll have to get more. But yeah, so today I wanted to read us a portion of Psalm 119. This is my favorite one of the Psalms. And I'm going to be reading starting in verse 9 and going through verse 16. So this says, this is a New Living Translation single column journaling by from Tyndale House, and so as I'm reading this will be in the New Living Translation. So, starting in Psalm 119, verse 9, it says, "How can a young person stay pure? By obeying your word. I have tried hard to find you. Don't let me wander from your commands. I have hidden your word in my heart, that I might not sin against you. I praise you, O Lord. Teach me your decrees. I have recited aloud all the regulations you have given us. I have rejoiced in your laws as much as in riches. I will study your commandments and reflect on your ways. I will delight in your decrees and not forget your word." On to Ecclesiastes 7. And for those of you that don't know what I meant when I was talking about the type of Bible, single column is just has the one column down the middle, and the journaling Bible has room on the sides for notes and coloring and things. This is my personal favorite type of Bible for just like daily reading, daily study, because I like to be able to write notes, but I don't like how crowded it gets when there's not room for the notes in the Bible. But anyways, Ecclesiastes 7 starting in verse 1 says, "A good reputation is more valuable than costly perfume, and the day you die is better than the day you are born. Better to spend your time at funerals than at parties. After all, everyone dies, so the living should take this to heart. Sorrow is better than laughter, for sadness has a refining influence on us. A wise person thinks a lot about death, while a fool thinks only about having a good time." Now, I just finished us at verse 4 there, and I wanted to pause and jump back up to verse 1. Verse 1 is just reminding us that it's better to have our soul be a pleasing aroma, to have our soul and our heart be pleasing to God and be smelly on the outside, than to be a whitewashed tomb and to smell and look good on the outside, but be an awful, rotting heart on the inside. We really need to focus as Christians on our inward, appearance rather than our outward. And I think that this is something that, again, is reiterating that to us, is that, God looks at our hearts, not at how we look outside. That's what man looks at, and we really need to recognize that, especially as women, since a lot of the viewers on this channel are women. But yeah, anyways, so then diving into 3 and 4, when you first read over this, it may be a little odd to read that a wise person thinks a lot about death, but I think that this is a valid point. Someone that's wise is focusing on how they can best use their time here and recognizes that their time here on earth is a gift and that it is inevitably going to end at some point. Now, we don't know the day or the hour or the moment when our last breath is going to be, but because of that, we need to live recognizing that we don't know when that is, and if we were to die today, what would we leave behind us? What would our legacy be? How would we have impacted others for Christ and just in general? And it's something that I think is what Solomon is trying to say, is to focus on, again here, What is your spiritual walk life? How is that pouring into your outward life? Are you just a nice smell on the outside, or is there a nice smell that's emanating from within you? So then picking up in verse 5, it says, "Better to be criticized by a wise person than to be praised by a fool. A fool's laughter is quickly gone, like thorns crackling in a fire. This also is meaningless. Extortion turns wise people into fools, and bribes corrupt the heart. Finishing is better than starting. Patience is better than pride. Control your temper, for anger labels you a fool." And I'm going to stop there at the end of verse 9, and we're going to jump back up to verse 5 here for a minute. Verse 5 says, "It's better to be criticized by a wise person than to be praised by a fool." Now, this is important because while criticism may hurt us sometimes, it may not always feel good to receive criticism. It's reminding us that the people we are surrounded by are either going to sharpen us or dull us as people. And if we're surrounded by people who are wise, if we're surrounded by people who are also seeking godly wisdom, we are inevitably going to be sharpened by our relationship with them, whether it's a friendship, whether that's our parents and kids, whether it's whatever it is. I should say, sorry, whether it's probably as the child with the parent, the sharpening would be happening, unless it's an adult child. Anyways, I'm rambling. But it's better to receive criticism than to be praised by someone who doesn't know what they're talking about. You know what I mean? And then jumping into verse 7, this is again just reminding us that our focus should not be on money, and we should never let money or income or any type of financial or material gain pervert justice. We should always and at all costs put justice above money, because if you are able to be bribed into doing something, you're probably not going to be a very trustworthy or reliable individual. And then verse 8 is the one that talks about finishing is better than starting, patience is better than pride. I think that this verse is really important because it reminds us that if we say we are going to do something, we need to follow through and finish that thing. I am very confronted by this verse because I'm definitely somebody that has a cajillion projects happening and just can't seem to finish some. And so this one really comes after me and reminds me that it's better to finish something than to just be full of talk and dreaming about all these things, but not ever actually finishing them. It's reminding us that God puts value on finishing and following through on what He has called us to do and on what we've told Him, hey, yeah, I'll do that for you. I can do that. We need to make sure that we are following through and finishing what we set out to do, especially if it's something that God has been placing on our hearts to do. And it again goes back to, I think it was chapter 5. Yeah, it goes back to chapter 5. It's a little less talk, a lot more action. I'm gonna just keep going back to that, alright? I hope you know that. I love that song. Anyways. So picking back up in verse 10, it says, "Don't long for the good old days. This is not wise. Wisdom is even better when you have money. Both are a benefit as you go through life. Wisdom and money can get you almost anything, but only wisdom can save your life." And I'm going to pause there for a minute at the end of verse 12. Sorry, I know I keep pausing and going back, but I wanted to talk about verse 10 where it talks about don't long for the good old days. Because I feel like for a lot of us, we tend to put a rose-tinted glass, over our past. We tend to feel like, the past was so much better than the present, when sometimes, and I would even go so far as to say oftentimes, our present is usually better than our past, but we're feeling the negativity and the difficulties of our present moment more than we do the past because we've already moved on from it. When we look back, we tend to just focus on the good things or the extremely bad things, and we don't tend to see the little inconveniences along the way, the little inconveniences that we tend to see so clearly in our present moment. And it's really important for us to recognize that we cannot ever go back to the good old days because likely they were not great. There were still issues, there were still problems. We just don't see them when we look back at it. And the other thing is, if we are so focused on going back to the good old days, we can't make our present moment the good days. We can't have amazing, wonderful, just truly enjoyable times in our present moment if we're focusing on the past. If we're focusing on, well, I just wish I could go back to when I was this age, or when I was doing this, or when I was dating this person, or whatever it may be for you. if we're constantly living our lives like that, we're never going to be satisfied. We're never going to be able to live a fulfilled life because we'll be so focused on the past that we can't enjoy the present moment where we are. And the present is a gift from God. It is literally a present. And this is something that I feel like is so heavily stressed in Ecclesiastes, that the idea of enjoying our toil and enjoying the life that we're living, because it's so easy as people, as humans, to either want the future or to want the past, and to not want what we're currently in. To not want the effort that it takes to get to point B. We just want to just skip there. We want to just press the fast forward button and get through all the hard stuff until we can have the good life. And frankly, that's just not how life works. That's not how God intended life to be. And until we can recognize that, until we can accept that, we're never going to be able to have as deep and personal of a relationship with God as we possibly could. So picking it back up in verses 13 and 14, it says, "Accept the way God does things, for who can straighten what he has made crooked? Enjoy prosperity while you can, but when hard times strike, realize that both come from God. Remember that nothing is certain in this life." I think that these two verses in particular are extremely important because it forces us to recognize and to remember that God's ways are higher than ours. While at times it's not necessarily going to make sense to us what he's doing, he knows what he's doing. And as Christians, we need to have enough trust in him, enough trust in the fact that he is good, that he is sovereign, that he knows what he's doing, that we can release any of our anxieties, that we can release any of the negativity that we're feeling to him, because he knows what's up. He knows what's going on. He sees the whole big picture, whereas we're only seeing, the next step, the next path, the next stair on the staircase. He can see the entire thing, and we need to lay down and trust that he knows what's best, even if it doesn't make sense to us. Even if we are sitting here thinking, oh my gosh, what are you doing? This is absolutely insane. God knows. And as Christians, we need to have enough faith to let God do his job. Let God orchestrate everything in the world as a whole and in our own personal lives. Because if we can't do that, how on earth are we going to have the faith to leap when he's telling us to, if we don't trust him to orchestrate his world, if we don't trust him to orchestrate our little life that we have as individuals? So continuing into verse 15, it says, and mine, this calls this the limits of human wisdom, and so chapter 7 verses 1 through 14 is called wisdom for life in my Bible, in my translation, and verses 15 through the end of the chapter are called the limits of human wisdom. So starting in verse 15, it says, "I have seen everything in this meaningless life, including the death of good young people and the long life of wicked people. So don't be too good or too wise. Why destroy yourself? On the other hand, don't be too wicked either. Don't be a fool. Why die before your time? Pay attention to these instructions, for anyone who fears God will avoid both extremes." And what I think that this is saying is that while obviously we want to do our best to live a life pleasing to God, at the same time, we shouldn't be beating ourselves up too much when we inevitably stumble, because frankly, we live in a fallen world. We are fallen humans. We are sinful creatures, and because of that, we are going to sin at some point, whether we want to or not, whether it's intentional or not. We need to recognize that as hard as we try to live the perfect Christian life, we're never going to get there. We're never going to be these good, perfect Christians, because frankly, we're not. We're all imperfect, fallible people. And because of that, we need to be okay with the fact that we're going to fail. We are going to fail millions of times over the span of our life and sin. None of us are ever going to be perfect. And while again, obviously, we should do our best to pursue righteousness and godliness, we also need to remember that sometimes it's, not that I'm condoning sin, but at the same time, we need to recognize that we're going to sin inevitably a lot throughout our lifetime, and that when it happens, rather than beating ourselves up and being super harsh on ourselves, we need to just go back to God, confess that sin, and move on. Because the more you dwell on your shortcomings, the more you dwell on your failures, the less time God has to mold you into a new being, because you're so focused on what's wrong with you, rather than what God is developing and making right within you. Continuing into verse 19 and 20, it really hits home on the point that we're never going to measure up, and we can only hope to do our best. So starting in verse 19, it says, "One wise person is stronger than 10 leading citizens of a town. Not a single person on earth is always good and never sins." Continuing into verse 21, Don't eavesdrop on others. You may hear your servant curse you, for you know how often you have cursed others. I have always tried my best to let wisdom guide my thoughts and actions. I said to myself, I am determined to be wise, but it didn't work. Wisdom is always distant and difficult to find. I searched everywhere, determined to find wisdom and to understand the reason for things. I was determined to prove to myself that wickedness is stupid and that foolishness is madness. I discovered that a seductive woman is a trap more bitter than death. Her passion is a snare, and her soft hands are chains. Those who are pleasing to God will escape her, but sinners will be caught in her snare. This is my conclusion, says the teacher. I discovered this after looking at the matter from every possible angle. Though I have searched repeatedly, I have not found what I was looking for. Only one out of a thousand men is virtuous, but not one woman. But I did find this. God created people to be virtuous, but they have each turned to follow their own downward path. And now, I think it's important to note that verses 26 through 28 are most likely talking about Solomon's harem. It's not saying that no woman can be right before God, because while no woman can on their own, it's important to remember all the, the judges in the Old Testament and the women in the New Testament that were involved in ministry. But we need to also recognize that, again, we as well as men are never going to measure up, because we are only made right with God through Christ and through Christ's sacrifice for us. And before closing out, I wanted to leave you guys with a single question, and that is, what from this chapter of Ecclesiastes do you need to take and apply to your own life? I would say more likely for most of us it's going to be something from the first half of this chapter. For me, I definitely need to take verses 8 and 10, which talk about, finishing our projects and not wanting to live in the good old days. But yeah, that was Ecclesiastes 7. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys got something from this study. If you guys have any questions or comments about either today's video or future videos, please feel free to leave them down below. And if you guys are interested in more content like this, please feel free to subscribe and also check me out over on Instagram, which is at t.and.god. I went the wrong direction for mirroring, but oh well. But yeah, if you guys leave this video knowing nothing else, I hope you guys know how loved, cherished, and precious you are to the God that created you, and I will see you guys next week. Bye guys!